Welcome to my review for the 1960 Hammer thriller The Full Treatment. Incidentally, you'll find all my other Hammer reviews in my Hammer playlist. So this one was directed by Val Guest and stars Ronald Lewis, Claude Dauphin, who I can't help but think of as Claude Dauphin, and Diane Cilento. I've not really heard of the two guys in this, but Diane Cilento, I know that she was Sean Connery's wife back during his James Bond era. I didn't know that she was an actress in her own right. So discovering her in this film was quite interesting, and I've got to say she's a very good actress. The story for this starts off in a really bizarre way. I could easily imagine some people, if they were watching this on TV in a random way, just tuning out after 20-30 minutes just because it's so odd. You really have to invest in this film for the full duration to get the best out of it. So we open up with a car crash. We don't actually see the car crash, we just see the aftermath. The very first shot of the movie is of two vehicles wedged together. Clearly they were coming in opposite directions and just collided. And there's this beautiful shot of the camera just pulls back from the wreckage and reveals more and more. So eventually the camera comes back far enough so that we can see a woman in the road. She obviously got thrown from her vehicle when the two vehicles collided. Now, there's a couple in this crash. They both recover. We never find out what happened to the other driver. Possibly he died and it's just never mentioned. But this couple, their names are Denise and Alan. They recover physically, but Alan starts to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. So they decide to move to the south of France for an indefinite period of time so that he can get his head together. I guess they can afford to do this, but it's mentioned that Alan is a former race car driver, so maybe they've just made loads of money from that and they don't need to work. So for the first sort of half an hour of the film, we just follow these two characters as they mingle around next to the coast of France and don't do a whole lot. And then something really bizarre happens. And this is where I can imagine some people would have a problem with this film, because it's a really odd thing to try and make convincing. So Alan randomly puts his hands around his wife's neck one day and makes out like he's going to strangle her. He's clearly not joking. And then he pulls back at the last minute and he's like, what did I just do? I don't understand. And his wife's obviously really freaked. We, the audience, have no clue why he just did that. I mean, I've heard of people doing similar things in their sleep, you know, that they're not fully in control. So they sort of reach over and do something to their partner, maybe grab them by the neck or something else, or maybe just go sleepwalking or something. But I've never heard of somebody wide awake just grab their partner's neck and make out like they're going to strangle that person, and then the whole time they didn't really understand why they were doing it. I mean, surely you would have a reason for wanting to strangle somebody if you're wide awake. So really odd. And a few scenes later, he does the same thing again and again. And I think at one point he almost does it with a telephone cord. So at this point of the story, I was just thinking to myself, what is this about and where is it going? I have no idea. Luckily, if you do commit to watching the whole of this film, it does get a whole lot better afterwards. So this film is mostly split into two distinct halves. There is a smaller third section right at the end, but the first part in the south of France is absolutely the weakest, just because we don't know what's going on for the longest time. And the stuff with Alan putting his hands around his wife's neck is just so weird. I mean, the scenery's great, don't get me wrong. The south of France looks magnificent, even in black and white. The acting's terrific. And there's some interesting use of a small cable car, which then comes back into play later in the film. But the story really comes into its own once the proceedings move to London. I mean, the scenery is not great thereafter, because we're now in like doctors' offices and living rooms. There's one really funny scene right at the start of the second half of the film where one or two of the characters are stood next to this window, and through the window you can see the most distinct looking London skyline you've ever seen. Big Ben's there. It's totally set up to make you realize that we're in London, but I'm sure the normal way to do this, to establish the change of scene, change of location, would be to have some kind of outdoor overhead shot of London, and then it would switch to inside the living room. Maybe you'd keep the background noise consistent. The way that Val Guest does it in this film is really cheesy and old-fashioned, but it gave me a little bit of a chuckle. But yeah, the plot of The Full Treatment is so much better in the second half of the film than the first half. It really does get going. Diane Cilento was absolutely the star for the first half of this film because you feel sorry for her getting attacked by her husband constantly, and the fact that she doesn't leave him, that she sticks by him, just makes her character even more likable. But once we get to London, the two guys really come to the fore as well in terms of their performances and establishing the characters a lot more. The guys start to get more screen time than Denise in the second half, which really kind of evened things out in terms of making all three of these characters really front and center to the point where you like all of them, you don't dislike any particular one. And then when the twists come towards the end, it's really rat-a-tat-tat, one after the other. It sort of reminds me of The Usual Suspects or that 80s film Clue, in that you're presented with one ending and then suddenly that's taken away and then you're given another one, and it's sort of like, whoa, when is the wheel going to stop? Am I going to get the final ending? But it's really good fun. Another thing I like about The Full Treatment is the fact that even though we have this barely believable story hook with the fake strangulation thing, the movie doesn't use that as an excuse to then go off and do loads of other barely believable things with the plot afterwards. The movie, for the most part, tries really hard to be realistic, to be believable. It really delves into the psychology of Alan's condition in a really mature way. And there came a point in this where I was sat there going over various options in my mind as to what would ultimately turn out to be the cause of why Alan's putting his wife through this ordeal. And I wasn't in that mental place to begin with this film. It took me a little bit of time to adapt, but I got there. And when I did, I found myself really invested in the whole thing. And I've got to say, as a psychologist, the David character, very impressive. Probably the best psychologist I've ever seen in a movie, albeit he is absolutely useless when it comes to women. So if we quickly talk about some of the things I didn't like about this film, I've already talked many times already about the main thing that is a problem with The Full Treatment, the fake strangulation thing. The ending that we arrive at is also a little bit shaky. I mean, it's not that I had a problem with how the story ends, just the fact that it's very old-fashioned and cheesy. This is the part of the film more than any other where you're reminded that you're watching a film from 1960, but that's just the way it was back then. If this film was done again today, you would get a better ending, I suppose, but that's not to say that it ruins the movie, not at all. And also, I wasn't a big fan of the music in this film, but I say that about a lot of films from that sort of era, you know, all that orchestral stuff that they used to do back then over and over again, even in scenes where they didn't need to do it. It does grate on my ears sometimes, but beyond that, I don't have that many complaints about this film, which is quite impressive given the fact that it is a 2-hour film, quite a long one for a Hammer film. So before I get on and give you a score for this, I'll quickly show you the Blu-ray that I own for it. I went out and bought this the other week, even though I've never seen the film before. That's just my level of commitment these days when it comes to Hammer. Very minimalist front cover, but effective nonetheless. And there's some good features on this. There's no commentary track, but there is a 21-minute documentary about the making of the film by a Hammer expert and a film historian. There's also an 11-minute documentary just on Diane Cilento, which I imagine would be interesting. There's a few other bits and bobs. There's a 4-minute piece about the bathroom scene that revealed too much for US censors. So did Denise originally get her kit off in this film or something and then it was taken out? I've no idea. On the whole, I'd say there's at least an hour's worth of features to enjoy on this Blu-ray. The presentation is very crisp. I've never seen this film before watching this Blu-ray, but I could easily imagine that this film has had some work done on it because it looks terrific. Right, let's get to the bag of terror then and find out what sort of score I'm going to give for The Full Treatment. So we've got 1, 2, 3 bloody axes out of 5 for The Full Treatment. That is a good score. This is a good film and a very memorable one, I think. Even if I didn't watch this film for the rest of my life, I think I would always remember it. It's very unique. I would absolutely recommend you give it a try. And that's all from me today. I'll be back soon with another Hammer review very soon. I think my next one is going to be the Evil of Frankenstein. I haven't done a Frankenstein review for a long time. I did The Curse of Frankenstein and The Revenge of Frankenstein many months ago, and then I've just gone into other Hammer films, but I think now is the time. I'm feeling it. So yeah, The Evil of Frankenstein, the third in the Hammer horror Frankenstein series, that will be my next Hammer review. Until next time, cheerio, bye bye, and don't strangle your wife at any point. It's not a good thing.